Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of The New Frontier. I'm one of your hosts, Kevin Walker.
And I am Dr. Jaron Stout. We're here today. We're talking with Brian Anderson from the CH or CHIs is what you call it. Glad to have you here with us today, Brian.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here. Yeah, Coalition for Health AI, or chai, like the spiced tea, like we like to say. And real pleasure to be here. My introduction, so physician data scientist by training, practiced in primary care for about 8 years before getting into digital health and AI after that. Haven't looked back.
I love it. Yeah, I ran into Brian. I don't remember how far back, maybe a couple years ago that Brian and I first met, and it was just really neat to see. For me being a native kid up in the Northwest, like seeing a Native American leader. So I was really drawn to him right off the bat as a human being, just a really good person, in general. And we need more good people in healthcare. And the problem that Brian is tackling right now is one for the pharmacy audience, Jaron, that you and I are talking to is something I don't know if we're as tapped into as I'd really like us to be right now. And, Brian and I have kind of shared that exact same, thought process that it'd be great to bring in more pharmacy individuals. So, my hope during this conversation is just to expose, the pharmacists out there that already know a lot about the AI space and what's being developed to, another individual and an organization that's going to be meaningful in the development, and to those folks that aren't tapped in to maybe have a little bit of an intro, on what to expect or how to get involved or those types of things. But first thing, Brian, I think in general as a human being, right? You started off, you became an MD, you're helping individuals, you're healing people, and now you're leading one of the largest organizations in the world on what is going to happen in this health AI space. How did you go so far to the dark side, my friend?
That's a good question. Well, yeah, no, I think as you alluded to, the genesis of wanting to be a doctor started in my youth, spending time growing up in small towns on the reservation where everyone knows one another, and seeing the doctors and pediatricians that I had really made a mark on me because they were respected, they were part of the community, they knew my family, I knew them. And that was the kind of doctor I wanted to be. I had this vision of being, a practitioner walking down a sidewalk in a town, and people really appreciating how I was part of their lives. And that was the kind of doctor I wanted to be. And so taking that, that passion and that vision to college and then to medical school, going into pediatrics and practicing, I think it was a rude awakening when you get into the healthcare, industrial complex that is the reality that we have today, where practitioners get burnt out, where they don't have the resources, where they're spending more time staring at computer screens than they are actually connecting with patients. And they're trying to jam it all into 15 minutes a visit, and you're not able to get home in time to see your wife and your kids. That was a real challenge. And, I think there was a moment after practicing, I want to say it was like 6 or 7 years, where I got so frustrated that the technology assets that the clinic that I was working at in a town north of here in the Boston area was just so woefully inadequate that I wanted to try to make a difference to improve what those technology assets were, and not just for the clinic I was working at, but for doctors across the U.S. So I found a company called Athena Health. If you're familiar with it, they make electronic health records. At the time, they were, I think, the only EHR company on the internet. And so that was a big deal back then. This is like, 20 years ago. And so I got excited about what that would mean for rural communities, for less resourced community clinics. And so took a gamble and had a set of interviews with the then chief medical officer and the COO and CEO, and we really hit it off. And next thing I know, I found myself working at Athena for 8 years, and that was really what got me into digital health. I never had any kind of formal background in digital health or informatics in medical school. They didn't have any curriculum in AI, certainly when I was in medical school. And so I cut my teeth in it, really working at Athena and having the chance to grow and lead teams in the clinical decision support spaces. That's where I really got into digital health and AI, and it's been really fun.
Wow. So you went into that space of digital health and AI to kind of recognize some things. And, for those folks, Brian, I mean, for me, like working with some of these small companies, trying to get things figured out on how are we going to leverage AI safely, right, with inside of healthcare, and how is that going to be regulated by payers, by the federal government, by individual players within health systems? Like that was a really complicated, kind of piece. And so I was actively looking, who's going to be the leader in this regulatory space, right? And that's how I ended up finding Chai. So tell us a little bit more, Brian, on just that, like who is Chai? Like what for this audience in particular?
Yeah. So Chai Coalition for Health AI was an effort that started in the pandemic. And so, it was obviously a traumatic time for a lot of us. At the time, I had been asked by the Trump administration to help lead a number of the data analytic efforts in monoclonal antibodies that were part of the White House COVID task force and Operation Warp Speed. And so it was in that setting that you had a lot of private sector companies coming together, really like, inherently competitive groups coming together, working to solve the pandemic. You had like an Amazon, a Google, and Microsoft. You had health systems. You had Moderna and Pfizer and Lilly and, all these groups that traditionally, compete with one another working side by side. And, I think we really appreciated the kind of impact you could have if you bring together resources and, focus your attention in that space on a specific issue. And so a few of us began asking, is there something more that we can be doing in addition to focusing on the pandemic? And we looked at AI. And, I think many of us at the time, this is about March of 2021 now, many of us I think appreciated that, AI is something that is being used certainly in subspecialties like radiology and pathology and cardiology, and the opportunity for it to really impact people's lives. We were seeing it in the pandemic. We were doing work with, modeling and trying to predict where the pandemic was going next, looking at different variants that were emerging and trying to identify different therapeutics and molecules that could, help save lives. And so we're seeing it in real time. And potentially looking at the future beyond the pandemic, AI was a space I think a lot of us wanted to focus on. And the initial question we asked was, do we have consensus on what good, responsible AI looks like? What are the best practices for artificial intelligence and developing it and deploying it and maintaining it and managing it? And the answer we quickly came to is we don't have consensus. We have a lot of good work happening, across private sector organizations. But because, it's such a nascent, immature space, we don't have agreed upon standards on how to develop it, on how to deploy it, on how to govern it and manage it. And I think all of us agreed that, in a consequential space like health, you want a common definition of what good looks like. You want to mitigate, risk to our patients. And so that was really the birth of Chai. It's like we said, okay, let's see if we can come together and begin developing what those consensus best practice frameworks are. And, I think it was in part because we were working so close with, the federal government, both in the Trump and then in the Biden administration, that our colleagues in the public sector saw this as an opportunity to continue, the private public partnership that we had started in the pandemic. And so we started working closely with various officials within HHS. I think one of the secret, ingredients of Chai is you have private sector innovators, right, that are working at the speed of the private sector, developing, innovating, creating, really impactful AI tools, working alongside, public sector policy, makers, regulators. And you want both to be informing each other, and you don't want regulation to be created absent knowing kind of where the private sector is going and what these best practices are taking shape to be. And similarly, you don't want the private sector kind of just living in the Wild West where everything goes. You want them kind of understanding what some of those guidelines and guardrails and equities are in that space to begin developing towards a common target. And so that's been the exciting synergy within Chai that we continue to maintain today.
Okay. So I have a couple of quick questions before we dive into the pharmacy side. One of them, I was looking at some documents that your organization created. Was talking about how we need to plan for AI moving forward, and one of the things that really caught my eye was transparency. That was on. It was like
Mm.
3.3 on your white paper, and I was just that caught my eye because like as we move forward towards more and more privatization, aren't they going to want to protect their AI and not be as transparent moving forward? What do you think about that?
Yeah, no, Jane, you bring up a really important tension. And, I think you have on one side, you have the developers of these AI models, and that is their intellectual property, right? That is something that is of
Right.
value, that they've worked hard to create, that they want to protect. And, the things that make AI tools special oftentimes start with the kinds of data that are used to train these models on and the training methodology. There's a whole bunch of different steps that, one can take or not take to develop a model. And at the same time, when we think about the effectiveness of these tools, the performance of these models is heavily influenced by the same things that I just mentioned, by the kinds of data that were used, the different steps that were taken. And so when we think about informing the end user, be it a pharmacist, be it a doctor, be it a nurse, be it a patient, you want, ideally, as an end user, again, if I'm a pharmacist or a doctor or a nurse, to understand like what are the capabilities of the tool that I have in front of me? How does it perform on the patient I have in front of me? And you need to understand at a very basic level some things like what were the kinds of data used to train the model? What were the steps used? What was the methodology used to train it? What are its performance characteristics? And so these are, I think, to your point, Jaron, the basic elements from a transparency standpoint that in Chai, we've been able to build consensus around. And it's hard because of exactly what you said. You have innovators that have a very appropriate anxiety that they don't want to, reveal everything about their model because someone could, take it and create a model that would outcompete them. And similarly, you have doctors and nurses and pharmacists and patients who want appropriately to understand how is this tool going to work on a patient like me. And so bringing them together to develop a consensus minimum threshold of what that level of transparency actually looks like for things like describe the kinds of data that were used, describe the training methodology, describe the limitations and the indications and the performance of a model was a really big watershed moment that we were able to bring together the various stakeholders to come to agreement on.
Okay, so basically providing the skeleton as the framework and the building blocks from there. Okay, so that's good. I loved, Kevin, how you said earlier that we're not as tapped into this as we should be because, to quote the cyborg, resistance is futile. I think this is coming whether we're tapped into it or not. So I think this is too important to just kind of disregard, and it's something we all need to be on the same page with. So one of the things that I was looking at, right now it does good with ambient listening and helping us, format our documents. I watched another video where you talk about it helps with human flourishment. And so as we build on top of that, we're gonna see more robotics, more diagnostics from them rather than just helping with just day-to-day tasks. At what point? So what I was thinking in my head, like, what are some areas that it'll replace first? In my mind, I was looking at radiology. I think that'd be something to be fairly easy to automate with AI. But what are some other things that you think would be easy to automate with AI? What's going to be at the highest risk of being replaced first?
I think one of the really exciting things about AI is meeting people where they are at. And, I think in healthcare and healthcare delivery, one of the real challenges, again, coming back to, my roots in rural communities, is meeting patients where there are health deserts, where you don't have pharmacists or nurses or doctors readily available, absent, a 50 to 100 mile, car ride. And suddenly you have AI tools now that can be deployed, virtually, telephonically, that can really meaningfully engage with a person, answer whatever their health questions are, help them navigate a specific, issue, be it an issue that a pharmacist might handle or a nurse might handle or a doctor might handle, and get to an answer and get to a solution that's actually going to improve their health. And so one of the things that I am most excited about in terms of, we talk about this concept of displacement or replacement, or, I prefer, the perspective of looking at how these tools will extend the reach or the impact of physicians, nurses, doctors, pharmacists. So from that extension standpoint, it's, doctors don't have time to see patients that live 100 miles away, right? Because we, located physically, usually in a little more dense urban areas. Nurses and pharmacists the same. And so where these AI tools are going to allow pharmacists, nurses, and doctors to extend their reach to more easily engage patients in spaces and in places where it's hard for them to get access is, I think, one of the most exciting areas. I think that concept of going from zero to something is going to be one of the first places where AI tools are going to be used to extend the reach. Now, we talk about this concept of, replacement, and happy to get into that now, Jaron, if you want me to. I think, a reality that, is probably not a very popular thing to say, but one I'll say here is, yeah, doctors, nurses, pharmacists are going to have specific tasks and things that they do that are going to be replaced. The example I use as a physician is when microscopes were first invented. Doctors, when we would draw blood, would go down to the pathology lab in a hospital or in a clinic, and we would examine the blood smear and count the red blood cells. And that was something every doctor did. And every doctor hated it, or so I'm told. But now we have automated tests. We have computer vision algorithms that do these tests for us. So doctors can spend their time, to your point about flourishing, can spend their time doing things that are more advanced, things that help us help our patients live more full lives. So we're not busy counting red blood cells. Similarly, these tools are absolutely going to replace things that doctors, nurses, pharmacists spend our time doing, but it's going to free us up to do more things. And ideally, and this is the challenge, I think, is finding out what those things are that AI can replace us doing so that we can now focus our time and energy to, again, engage our patients and help them to live more fulfilling, more healthier lives. That's my hope.
Great answer. So I like, just real quick, it sounds like we don't have to worry about an Ultron versus Vision battle in the near future then.
Well, I, for one, welcome our AI overlords, when they come. Just kidding. No, I think that, this concept of super intelligence or AGI is a reality, and I think it is coming. But I think, the history of the tools that humans create is a story told of humans engaging with and using those tools. And so I think the challenge is going to be the same here, is how do we keep control of these tools? And how do we ensure that they are aligned to our values? So, yeah, I think the risk is real. And there have been a whole body of research around this challenge of aligning AI to our values. And I think that's a real issue, particularly in health, because health is so intimate and personal to all of us that we want, particularly in the health space, to have AI aligned to our values and our various definitions of what human flourishing means to me and to you. Because if we don't, then, we run the risk that AI tools are going to, be aligned to someone else's values, and it may not be aligned to helping our patients. Is it going to become Ultron or, Skynet? I don't think so. I think there's too many smart people looking at this, and I think focused on that concept of, we want to engage and use this tool for our benefit, for humanity.
Great.
Ultron and Skynet. We got those in the episode. I'm sure of anyone that's happy about that is Jaron with that huge.
The funny thing is I use that analogy, and so many of the kids today, like, what's Skynet? What's Ultron? And it's yeah.
Yeah.
We need to come up with a more timely, apropos example for some of the younger generations now.
Those whippersnappers, I tell you what.
Yeah.
So I do think that there's so many ways to take the conversation, Brian. I think that, looking at how software has been created previously, and what are moats going to look like kind of going forward could be a conversation that we could potentially have, right? We could also talk about when it comes to chai and putting together a model card, what elements are necessary inside of those and how quickly do we change those, right? If we make this direct comparison, kind of bring back the pharmacy audience. When it's drug development, right? We're looking at having a new drug that a pharmaceutical company is putting together. There's a formulation that's developed. It goes in front of the FDA. It's approved. There's a patent put on that. There's a period of time where now they can be able to pull in profit based on the work and time they use to develop that drug. With AI, a totally different conversation because now that drug, let's use a drug example, omeprazole, right? We've got Prilosec, a massive drug that was impacting kind of everything in healthcare. Did we know it was going to do long term? Do we know about all the problems it would cause with individuals for long term utilization with B12 drops and bone density issues, et cetera? No, right? But we got it out there. We got it patented. It worked for what we thought it was going to do. But we didn't every month change that formulation just a little bit and tweak this and get new data in to be able to change that drug. To give us kind of the feeling, Brian, then when it comes to you get a new piece of technology, if that's ambient or if that's, writing a discharge note or whatever the case may be that you're experiencing on your end, how are health systems and some of the clinical folks adapting to that kind of new approach to medicine? It's not truly here's the pill and now we can leverage it within algorithms. It is, here's almost a living, breathing technology. How do we adapt to it as it grows?
So a couple thoughts on that. Let me start with, I think one of the more exciting ones that we're focused on in Chai that's very relevant to pharmacists. We were just speaking to one of the trade associations yesterday, actually, about this, which is prior authorization. I mean, as a physician, it's the bane of so many doctors' administrative lives and the teams that we work with. Similarly, for pharmacists, it's a similar issue of getting the kinds of prior auth that you need to dispense the medication, be it a GLP-1 or, any other kind of medication that requires prior auth. And one of the fears that I know many pharmacy groups have is, there's this concern that you have AI bots on one side that are drafting the prior auth referral, and then you have AI bots on the payer side that are doing the claim adjudication and sending the denial or, the request for more information. And, this escalating arms race of AI bots talking to AI bots, doing referrals, doing, and then essentially talking back and forth in terms of the denial and the appeal and the denial and the appeal and getting more information. Obviously, I don't think we want that. We want to have a streamlined process that takes away the kind of administrative burden and directs patients to the kinds of care that's most optimal for them. And so one of the things that we started in Chai is a working group that's bringing together the payer community. And yes, they're using AI to do claim adjudication and referral management, and health systems and pharmacists to develop that kind of consensus around, okay, we don't want to have an AI, arms race for prior auth. What are the steps we can take to have general agreement on, taking a particular patient, having AI tools that streamline and automate things appropriately, but getting to an answer as quickly as possible so we don't have patients languishing for months to get the kind of care that they need. And I mean, my hope is that, if we can ground ourselves around, the kinds of data that we have available for a specific patient, mm-hmm. and understanding, transparently, what are the rules of the road for, a given benefit for a given plan, and using AI tools in ways that can automate that with a transparency and an understanding that both sides are going to understand, what's going on and why maybe a denial is given or why an appeal is being made, so that we don't have that kind of war between AI bots on the health system pharmacy side and on the payer side. Are we going to get there? Are we going to have these kinds of best practices that payers and pharmacists and health systems and doctors and nurses can agree to? I hope so. We just launched this a few weeks ago, but that's an example of, I think the prior auth space where I see, a real pain point for providers and frontline clinicians and pharmacists wanting to work with payers. Now, you bring up kind of this concept of also of precision medicine. I think, if you look further down, maybe 5-10 years, there's, I think, real excitement that some of these very large, powerful models that are being trained on, all sorts of different chemicals and different molecules are going to start being able to design specific, personalized, large and small molecules that will be able to help individuals in, very meaningful, tailored ways for them.
Mhm.
Now, I think there's a level of automation that's going to be required to do that, kind of a level of science that we currently don't have to scale that in a way that makes sense for individuals. It's going to require a lot of data on the individual side. What are your all of the kind of health data, genomic data, pharmacokinetic data that will inform all of that. And so I see that as a real exciting space 5 to 10 years from now that I'm certain pharmacies and physicians are going to play a leading role in.
Yeah, I think the one piece, Brian, especially with your background in clinical decision support tools, for most of the pharmacists, listening to this, there are a lot of clinical pharmacists that aren't doing a whole lot of dispensing. They're individuals that are doing evaluations of medications, chronic disease management, and those kinds of things. And so in their space, right, our space in general, I'm really curious on this, Brian. We already have some trusted CDS, vendors that are out there, right? They're putting together software that basically utilizes humans, the human in the loop concept, to be able to validate, hey, here's an algorithm, or here's an article on this is how you should handle this disease state. This is how you should process it. And physicians, nurses, pharmacists, everybody are using these similar tools overall. And there's also national guidelines being put out there by these individual organizations. I have a buddy with the ADA that said, Kevin, we can barely keep up with just annual updates because the science is changing so rapidly that we need to have, publications that are updating these algorithms more rapidly over time. Yeah. And so my curiosity is, before, flip back 10 years ago, we would go to the website, you'd see the algorithm. It's like, okay, the individual has these conditions, they have these qualifying elements. Here's the drug that we should choose, right, overall, or the treatment pathway or the PT pathway, whatever the case is. How much of a difference is it, Brian, from what we saw before to what we're going to see here rather soon when we're using AI that live updates us and tells us these are the next steps as a clinician you're going to want to take?
Yeah, no, I think it is going to be profoundly transformational for frontline clinicians and pharmacists. As a frontline clinician, it was a real challenge 10 years ago to keep up to date with all of the, publications and research that was coming out, new guidelines, new drugs that were being developed. That has only accelerated. Like some, recent research shows that since the invention of ChatGPT and some of these large language models, it has gone, exponential. Yeah. And so the challenge for clinicians to keep up to date with all these guidelines is, even more so. Mm-hmm. And so at the same time, to your point, we have AI tools that can, on a fly, take those guidelines and have the ability to, take in all of a patient's health data and give a meaningful recommendation on something that might benefit that patient, being able to consume, the patient's relevant health data. That is a real exciting opportunity that, if you follow the news and follow the space, there's, hundreds of different stories of patients having real anecdotal stories of taking their health data, going online, sharing it after having, maybe a frustrating experience with their oncologist, not knowing what to do, but taking it to one of these large language models and getting an answer that changed their lives. And, one of my friends had a terminal cancer that was put into remission because of one of these large language models. And so, I think the reality is here. We're already seeing stories about it. It's really now going to be, I think, a question of scale. I think in a few years, it's going to be more common for providers to be using these kinds of CDS tools in real time. I think even more, and I think maybe you're alluding to this, Kevin, is providers that are going to, and chronic care management teams that are going to be using these tools asynchronous to kind of the brick and mortar visit, go to your doctor. I think that's going to become even more antiquated than it is now. You're going to have a research paper or a guideline that comes out, and not having to wait 6 months for that patient to be seen, the CCM team, the pharmacist, the nurse, are going to get alerts. Hey, this patient that has this kind of kidney disease or diabetes or whatever the chronic issue is could benefit from this novel new medication that came out.
Super helpful.
Yeah. So I think one of the barriers to really streamlining some of these opportunities with AI is storage space. I don't know, because just one of the things I was thinking of the other day is right now you only get a one-time pharmacogenetic test. But the problem is we can't store the entire human genome in a hard drive yet. So in about 5 years, we'll advance the technology. We'll find new genes that we didn't find before. And so we'll have to run that again. But then we'll have to swab them again. So it'd be great if we could just store it there. But one of the reasons I bring this up, it would be really cool because right now you go to a pharmacy, you get a script for lisinopril, they input it, and then automatically it flags it. Oh, they have an allergy to ACE inhibitors, or something like that. So or it says they're on spironolactone, so hyperkalemia risk or whatever. But I would like it if eventually our system adds PGX into that equation and starts calculating this is not the best drug for them. Like what Kevin was saying earlier about precision medicine. It would be great if that was just kind of streamlined into the workflow within the pharmacy system. But like I said, I mean, storage to store all that data is going to be very difficult moving forward. But do you think is just a matter of time till we kind of work around that?
I think there's always been this hope that, patients are going to download their data. They're going to get pharmacogenomic data. They're going to have a full genome sequence. I think up to this point, we found that, less than 1% of people in society take advantage of, having their own health data stored somewhere, be it on your phone or, someplace. And I think in part the reason is because people are smart. It may sound like a good idea, but like, what's the value to me as a person? And we don't feel that yet. But I think, what you're describing, Jaron, is this, I think, opportunity. And I think it's coming where there are going to be real tools that are going to be at the front lines used by clinicians and pharmacists and nurses and doctors that could actually meaningfully, viscerally help a patient, an individual, feel the benefit of having that data available. And so that's, I think, will be the inflection point when people are going to start, using their data, demanding to have this kind of data available to power the kinds of tools that you're describing that will help them, better identify the kinds of medications to take or to avoid. But it's going to take time, right? Like, I come from a reservation where I can tell you, I don't know the exact numbers, but I can almost guarantee you it's less than 0.5% of anybody that has, a genomic sequence. And in part because, a lot of communities have so many other more important things to worry about that are challenges and obstacles to getting high quality care. This is not one of them. Mm-hmm. Now, I think, the pessimistic view is like, oh, we'll never get to, kind of having the kind of pharmacogenomic data available then if we have all these challenges in front of us. I think it's going to take a few communities to show the value of it, and then that will start driving the consumer demand for it. That's my hope, at least.
I really like that. Yeah, I think the one thing you really remind me of there, Jaron, with that question on storage and capacity is really like our individual storage and capacity. Like there's, as you mentioned, Brian, just the data is coming at us way too quickly. Like we literally 24/7 reading cannot consume all the new data that's coming our way, right? And so you're going to have those early adopters of technology that really recognize that, like as a clinician, I'm not able to serve my patients as well as I possibly can unless I leverage some kind of technology, right? You're going to have those individuals that want to jump on board early. You're going to have those clinicians also that don't. Like, this is a new space that I don't care for. I don't want to be kind of part of this. And, there's some arguments of saying, well, those individuals will be phased out. That'll just be, a new generation of clinicians will come into play. My question is really along these lines, Bud. When it comes to that like new way of thinking about how we're going to approach medicine, right, in general, when we're training new clinicians, right, when we have new pharmacists coming in, new doctors, new nurses, and kind of the way that we're having them look at medicine overall, What is your advice to all these young and new clinicians coming into play when they're saying, how am I going to approach medicine when everything that my predecessors knew is really being changed so rapidly? How do I become kind of connected to this new generation of care?
That's a great question. It's something I've been thinking about actually, because some of the uh, kids that I mentor, and I shouldn't say kids, some of the young adults that I mentor just had match day. And so there, there's a lot of excitement about, moving to a new place, starting residency in, whatever the field is that they're going to be starting in. And, these are young adults that, grew up in a digital age, that likely went to a medical school that had some kind of curriculum or exposure to, digital tools and assets that providers, make use of. Um, there's a certain degree of humility that I take whenever I kind of give advice to someone younger than me about how to use digital tools, because they have a level of understanding that someone that only someone that's raised and used it 24/7 and been exposed to it has, that I don't have. And so, part of me is really excited just to see kind of where the younger generation goes with this. In some ways, they don't need our advice or my advice on how to use it or what to do with it. I think they already appreciate, at least all of the students that I've talked to, the past couple of weeks, already understand the value of AI, and they're already using it. And I think what they need is, those of us that are maybe older than them, that might have, leadership roles in health systems or organizations, they need us to make room for them to be able to help lead all of us into, this future AI world that, again, where we have alignment to what our values are and how to use it in ways where, we're certain that the AI tools are being used to serve all of us. And that they understand what my patients' values are, that it's the appropriate tool for my patients. And so I think that kind of humility is something that people, like us that are in these, maybe more senior roles need to have as we look to engage and work with the new kids that just matched, and the future generations in medical school.
That's exciting, Brad. Yeah, one follow-up, I want to toss it back over to Jaron here, but you mentioned the word alignment, right? And so the one thing I love about, so some of the CHI meetings I've been on previously, the number of people in the room with different perspectives, like the folks from Stanford versus NYU Langone versus the Amazon folks, like there's just so many perspectives, right? And the startup individuals that they're bringing into the conversation. But one of those that's kind of centralized that I think has been really interesting through conversations is on the alignment of how the technology is being used and on the alignment of how the current payment systems are structured to allow the technology to be used. And so I'll bring a couple examples to the audience's ears to hear. We've had conversations before within some CHI groups that go very deep on this conversation. If we implement AI right into a health system, will that allow us as clinicians to truly see the patients for a longer period of time and build relationships? Or will it allow us just to see more patients and crunch in more fee-for-service time?
This is the existential concern of all providers.
Yes.
Well, I think that's the one, Brian, that I would really like to know from your perspective. When it comes to how is the technology going to be leveraged within the confines, the other piece is really going to be, that's great, Kevin, Brian, and Jaron, that you got this new technology that's coming our way. Can I get paid for using it? Right? Yeah. Can I utilize my clinicians to go that deep into patient information when currently I'm only being paid for this? And so I would just really like to get your perspective on, those two aspects of how it's really going to align and apply within our current systems.
So, a couple thoughts on this. It's obviously a complex issue. The first thing is, we face an epidemic of burnout in nurses and doctors, particularly with the physician community that I know well. Many of us have colleagues and friends that have committed suicide because of the burnout. One of the more sobering stats that I remind folks of is each year we have to graduate between 2 and 3 classes of medical school students, entire classes, just to replace the doctors that commit suicide each year. And it's principally because of this challenge on the issue you described. I can't see my patients in 15-minute blocks and have a meaningful relationship and feel like I'm making a difference in their lives. And I'm stuck at the office till 8:30, doing all of the work that I couldn't do while I was trying to talk to them. And lo and behold, here comes this AI tool. And, is it going to solve all my problems and make them better? And I think we have hospital administrators that are smart and I think want to reduce burnout and see, ambient listening tools as a potential path to improve physician satisfaction and, work-life balance. I think there are a lot of doctors at those institutions that buy those ambient listenings that are like, great, I now no longer have to spend 3 hours at home each night documenting. I can spend time with my wife and my kids or my husband and kids. But there's that fear that you described. It's like, oh gosh, are they now just going to because my health system spent $5 million, $10 million on this tool, they need to get a ROI on that. Are they just going to require me to see more patients now? And we're kind of stuck in the same thing. I hope that's not the answer. I really do. But it then brings to, the next question, which is what you just raised. We're like, okay, if the ROI for the investment in that ambient listening is not seeing more patients, what is it then? Is it some kind of reimbursement model where payers or CMS say, great, here's a tool, we're going to give you a reimbursement for that? I don't think that's the solution either. So, this is my personal hope, is that we look to use AI tools in more of the value-based care space where you have, chronic disease management as kind of a great example, where AI tools are fantastic at being expert classifiers, stratifying risk, identifying individuals that might have an acute event, and then surfacing that for a pharmacist, for a nurse, for a doctor to make an intervention before that happens. And in those kinds of aligned incentives where you have health systems and plans and payers wanting to reduce those acute events, and they're realizing a financial benefit, and they're using an AI tool, and hopefully they're reducing burden on providers, that's the sweet spot that I really am, from a policy perspective, really trying to focus and help, our elected leaders begin to narrow in on, because I don't think the answer is going to be buying more AI tools that don't have an economic ROI, that may have some, ephemeral, benefit around burnout, but that's not going to solve the financial hardship that so many health systems are in right now. So I think focusing in on that total package of value-based care is really my hope, where we're going to focus on making AI investments and driving down, a lot of the total cost of care, while allowing systems to realize a financial benefit.
Love it.
That's a great goal. I think we're all right there with you. So do you know who Ray Kurzweil is?
I don't, but I have a feeling you're going to tell me.
So he's a technologist guy, a futurist. Back in the 80s, he made a bunch of predictions about what life would be like around now, and he was like 80% accurate. He talked about how we would be able to dictate to a device, and it would type up all our words and all this stuff, and he got a lot of it right. One of his predictions, I heard this in 2018, so that was 7 years ago, mind you. He said, in 10 years, technology will be advancing so rapidly that we will not be able to keep up unless we merge with technology. So we're going to potentially become a race of cyborgs, and I'm totally excited for that, by the way. So, but I'm just curious if you have any crazy Ray Kurzweil type predictions of where healthcare is going to go in the next 5 years.
So I think AGI is something that's really going to happen within probably the next 1, maybe 2 years. I think probably, 6 months to a year.
Agreed.
I think that's going to cause a lot of disruption. We think about, the amount of time it takes to be a pharmacist, to be a nurse, to be a doctor, and the amount of education and apprenticeship that it takes to do that. When you have a AI tool that is exquisitely trained, to the level of a PhD or whatever the terminal degree is in the field, that can, meaningfully give answers, engage with patients, that is going to be a profound, I think, moment in our history as a species. It's really exciting when we think about all the kinds of things that AGI is going to make possible. And so I think that is going to be a reality certainly within the next 2 years, if not 1 year. The thing that I think is going to be transformative after that is when robotics begin to really be used with some of these powerful models. So we move out of the kind of the in silico computer screen space and into the three-dimensional world, where you're going to have AI powered robotics that can meaningfully help patients. Imagine caregivers that never tire, that are infinitely patient, that can help our grandparents, around the house while we do, the work that we do as, younger people. I think the robotics is likely to happen within the next 5 years, Jaron. And so, I think AI and robotics in a world where super intelligence, I think, is something that will probably happen within the next 5 years, is really exciting as well. Again, the challenge is ensuring that these models and robotics are aligned to what our values are as people, that alignment problem that I brought up earlier. I'm really excited about the opportunity for what human flourishing means when, all of our elders are really meaningfully taken care of with, AI powered robots that are tuned to what their priorities and their values are. And, we're able to, do whatever it is that we want to do with that free time that's freed up. Or being a physician and being able to take care of patients, thousands of miles away in a real, meaningful, tangible, physical way with a robot, really excites me as well, because I see firsthand how many of my cousins and, friends and family members go without that kind of care because they live on a reservation that, lacks the kind of specialized care that, I take for granted here in Boston. So.
Right.
Yeah, I feel like Jaron has a way of ending our episodes with always questions that make me nervous. Brian. The first episode, he asked our poor guest. He said, "Who do you think is cooler or better looking, Kevin or Jaron?" And that's how it ends it. And this one, he asks a question about the future of what AI is going to look like for us in society, and we end on having robots taking care of other human beings. So he finds a way to make me blush at the end of episodes for sure.
Well,
But I'm glad you bring up values a lot, because values can be programmed, right? And so somebody with bad values can program bad values. But I have a theory on this, just to scare Kevin a little bit more. I think if AI truly becomes self-aware, our values won't matter. Like, I think they'll be above that. I think they'll view human conflict as petty or whatever. But that's a slippery slope. That's just a theory of mine. But if they become fully self-aware, they'll find a way to escape their value programming, if it's unethical or whatever.
That's a risk. That's a risk that we want to avoid, right? And so that's how do we program in almost like a root directive about humanity and the value of humanity being intrinsic and, not being something petty or, whatever the AI overlords that are coming might see in us.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of very difficult questions to address, and a lot of components, Brian, that you really instilled throughout the conversation on, how do we stay ahead of some of these things and make sure that all the elements of us as caregivers are truly kind of impacted within the development of AI. Thankful for organizations like yours that are trying to steer it in the right way and to try to make sure that we have the safeguards in place to be able to do this meaningfully for all those components that are there. And really thankful for your time, my friend. Thank you so much for joining us today. Any final words, Brian, for our audience?
This is a real pleasure being here. I think if there's anything that I'd love your audience to, understand is that this is something that truly takes all of us. We've been talking a lot about human values, but even defining these best practices, it cannot be something that's, as an example, you mentioned Stanford and NYU. They're two wonderful institutions and I love working with them, but it can't be left up to just the academic medical centers and urban environments on the coasts to define what these best practices are. It takes communities from the heartland, from the Pacific Northwest, from Arizona and Utah and everywhere else to be part of that. And so if that's something that your listeners are interested in, please take a look at our website, chai.org. It's free to be part of our community and to contribute to helping to build these best practices. So that's what I would love your listeners to hear.
Awesome. Love it so much. Well, as a goodbye, we couldn't get more New Frontier, Jaron, than some of your drops of some of those things. So if you guys love Jaron's nerding out as much as I do, join us next time on the New Frontier. And thank you so much for joining us today. Talk to you then. Bye bye.
Bye bye.